External considering. The more requirements that we set, the more internal considering we will have. And always be disappointed, feeling that someone else is to blame. People who have multiple requirements make life very difficult for themselves. Nothing is right. They are not surrounded by the right people, they are not treated properly, they never have enough money and so on. In this work we must gradually feel our own nothingness through self-observation. The opposite of internal considering is therefore external considering. External considering involves thinking of others. It is one of the few things in the work that we are actually told to do. We are told not to internally consider, not to have negative emotions and so on, then we are told to externally consider, just as we are told to remember ourselves. When we are in a state of internal considering, which is our usual state, we are really thinking only of ourselves. We regard ourselves as the center of the universe, and much like Copernicus, we have to realize that things do not revolve around us. To internally consider gives us only self-emotions, and as these increase, our character and personality become more shut in. We breathe too much of our own air, just as someone with a paper bag to their mouth. We all know people to whom we cannot speak for a moment, without their beginning to tell us what troubles they have, what a hard life they lead, how everything afflicts them and so on. Such people are ruined. They are dead to this world. The work points out that it is negative emotions that govern this planet, and not sex, wealth, or power. Just think about how many people are completely ruined by indulging constantly in negative emotions. Internal considering is a branch of identifying, and is closely connected with negative states in us. We must not think, however, that the opposite of internal considering consists of a hearty, optimistic manner, and so laugh out loud often. That is not external considering at all. The opposite of internal considering, and what is in part a means of fighting against it, is external considering. External considering is based upon an entirely different relationship towards people from internal considering. It is adaptation towards people, to their understanding, and to their requirements. By considering externally, a person does that which makes life easy for other people, and so for themselves. External considering requires a knowledge of people, an understanding of their tastes, their habits, and superstitions. At the same time, external considering requires a great power over oneself, a great deal of control over oneself, because very often an individual desires not to express or to show to another what they really think of him or feel about her. However, if they are a weak person, they will of course give way and say what they really think, then afterwards justify themselves, and say they did not want to lie, did not want to pretend, but wanted to be sincere, and people must take them like that, because they always prefer to speak their mind. They'll declare that truth hurts, and many other clichés that people take as strength of character. Then they convince themselves it was all the other person's fault. They really did want to externally consider them, even to give way to them, not to quarrel and so on. But the other person did not want to consider them at all, so this means that nothing could be done about it. This often happens, that a person begins with a blessing and ends with a curse. They begin by deciding to externally consider, then afterwards blame other people for not externally considering them. This is an example of how external considering passes into internal considering. If someone really remembers themselves, then they understand that another person is a machine just as they themselves are, and then entering into their position, they will put themselves into that place, wear their moccasins, so as to really be able to understand and to feel what that other person thinks and feels. If we can do this, then our work becomes easier for us. However, if we approach people with our own requirements, then nothing except new internal considering can ever be obtained from it. Right external considering is very important in this work. It often happens that people who well understand the necessity of external considering in life, do not understand the necessity of external considering in the work. They even imagine that just because they are in the work, they have the right not to consider others, whereas in reality, in the work, that is, for our successful work, 10 times more external considering is necessary than in everyday life. Because only external considering on our part shows our valuation of the work and understanding of the work. Success in this work is always proportional to the valuation and understanding of it. Remember that work cannot begin and cannot proceed on a level lower than that of ordinary life. It must begin on the level of good householder, layman, or laywoman. This is a very important principle, which for some reason or other is often overlooked. People must conduct their affairs and behave as good householders. In the work, external considering is more necessary than in life. It does not make self-emotions, but others' emotions. The second aim of the work in conjunction with others, draws together the necessity of external considering, of putting ourselves into another person's place, and realizing other people's difficulties. In the practice of external considering, it is necessary to realize that other people are mirrors of ourselves. If we have compiled an album with good images of ourselves, through sincere self-observation, then we will not have to look far into it to find in ourselves just what it is that we object to so much in the other person, and then we should be able to put ourselves in the other person's position, to realize that they also have this impediment that we notice in ourselves, that they experience their own inner difficulties, just as much as we have, and so on. External considering can be practiced when we are alone, by going over carefully what we might have said to someone, then put ourselves in their position by visualizing them saying the same things to us, using the same intonation. External considering is as vast and as varied in its range as is internal considering. There cannot be right development of the emotional center without the practice of external considering, valuation of this work, and the practice of external considering develops emotional center. The more that we value the work, the less can false personality govern us, the less vanity can we possess, and the more that we externally consider, the less important will we imagine ourselves to be. In the work there is no such thing as pretending to do good, when we really wish bad. It is no use pretending to be nice to other people when we hate them in our hearts. All this work depends upon inner sincerity. External considering is not hypocrisy, it is not good works, or altruism, but a question of inner attitude. Remember that when we find the same thing in ourselves that we are irritated by in someone else, it has the magical effect of cancelling the whole situation out. This is real forgiving in its true sense. We know that our natural state is to be surprised that there is anything wrong with us. Of course we often blame ourselves, as it were. We say, "Yes, I am afraid I was very much to blame for that incident." "Yes, certainly you were," says the other person. Are we not then shocked and taken aback? We become hurt and offended at once. All this because it is very difficult to think that anything is wrong with us, and it's all part of the sleep we are in, the deep sleep that covers all of humanity. Self-observation is very harsh, and becomes more harsh, because if it is done sincerely then it will hurt. However, it lets light in, and stops all sorts of rank weeds from growing within us, among them all the strange growths due to internal considering, self-pity and singing lamentations. Then at last we begin to see what it means that one must realize that they are nothing, before they can expect eventually to become something. Regarding that form of internal considering which is based upon feeling that life has cheated us, that we should be in a different situation, remember that the work points out emphatically that everyone starts out from precisely where they should be. It says that the conditions under which we encounter this work are exactly the right conditions for us. Nothing is more absurd than to think that one's life is being wasted in this work. It is extraordinary that people have such narrow opinions as to what their life should be like. They have, as it were, one or two prescriptions for life, and if a person's life does not correspond to these expectations, then it is regarded as being wasted, or even worse, useless. With such an outlook one might internally consider a great deal, and feel that everything is against them, even God and the whole universe. This is simply because they do not take their life in the right way. They make demands which cannot be satisfied, much like a person who goes into a grocery store, then asks for a top hat or a sewing machine, and does not take what can be sold to them there. The forces of hypnotism which keep us asleep are the same for everyone. If awakening is our aim, then whatever our circumstances are, it should make no difference to us, unless perhaps we are forcibly deprived of the work. The section previously shared on Karma Yoga speaks to this. No better formulation has been made regarding how to avoid internal considering in connection with the ordinary circumstances of our lives. Since internal considering is a form of identifying, we must realize that the practice of non-identifying outlined in terms of the word detachment is the cure for internal considering. If we realize that internal considering can become a real illness and ruin us, if we can see it at work in ourselves, then we will do all in our power to try to escape from it. It is no good saying, for instance, "Oh, so-and-so has no idea what life is like for a person such as me. It will only increase your internal considering. It is the internal considering in yourself that has to be stopped, or else it will grow and grow and grow. It will spread like wildfire, consuming everything young and growing within you. Do not ask what is the remedy for internal considering either. We all have to study it in ourselves, then notice what harm it does to us. From that we gain a real desire to free ourselves from it. We have got to see it first in ourselves, and then begin to take it seriously, in conjunction with all the other things that we are told in this work to practice. The whole of the work is necessary. The application of all parts of the work are necessary, for the whole of the work is a living organism. We have covered the necessity for considering externally in the work. External considering must begin from the start of the work, as far as a person is able to. A person who is self-centered, who only thinks of themselves, then of others only in relation to themselves, cannot go far. Such a person works only along the first line of work, the line of work on oneself, and then only to a very limited extent. The second line of work has to do with other people, and one's attitude toward them. This demands work on oneself also. It does not mean simply that we must endure the unpleasant manifestations of others, and remember they also have to endure ours, but it means rather the practice of external considering in general. Everyone has a more or less fixed way of taking other people, due to attitudes and buffers. We see others through our attitudes and buffers. In general, we do not like other people. Instinctively, we are hostile. You can tell this when you pass someone in a corridor or on the sidewalk. They tend to tense your muscles. You know that it has been said that we should not pretend we like other people, however try to work on dislike. Dislike grows very early. We cannot externally consider another person, if we only nourish dislike. Everyone splits easily into like and dislike, then in relationships, the disliking must not be allowed to grow mechanically. Through self-observation we notice we have two memories for a person. When we are negative, we remember only unpleasant things, when not negative we forget them. We have some idea of what fair treatment means with regard to outer behavior. But we have to be fair inside ourselves to others, and this really is work on oneself that takes the form of external considering. A cluster of unpleasant thoughts and feelings about another person that we have allowed to enter consciousness willingly, can begin to grow. It is both for the sake of ourselves, and of others that something must be done, that we must work on ourselves to neutralize this unpleasant and powerful material in us. All of our intelligence and sincerity, our work memory will probably be required to neutralize the toxin, so we can once more treat others fairly inside ourselves. We will have to put ourselves in another's place. We will have to drop all self-justifying, and above all we will have to remember what we have observed in ourselves, and what we are truly like, before we criticize another person. On the other hand, we need not of course do this. We can simply internally consider. We can make accounts, saying to ourselves that other people are always wrong, that we have not been properly treated, that we are owed by life, that others are indebted to us, that the universe has dealt us a tainted hand. All this is the basis of so many relationships in life, the basis of internal considering. Notice that in a relationship between two people, one of them usually externally considers a little more, and the other often only internally considers, then complains about everything. In the work, external considering must go more deeply than in life. It really belongs to the purification of our emotional center. One of the objectives of this work is to awaken the emotional center, which is drugged with negative emotions and all of the small petty emotions of self, of vanity, of self-conceit, narcissism, and so on. External considering in the work sense requires conscious effort, whereas internal considering is mechanical. It requires no effort at all but goes on by itself, growing by itself just as do negative emotions. In the work, external considering does not spring from life motives, which is why it requires conscious effort. We have to consider people who in life we would probably not for a moment think of considering. It is this kind of external considering that can change our level of being. Take for example a person that practices external considering in life, for instance a headwaiter or maitre d' in a popular restaurant. They are probably very astute, they notice what people like, what their peculiarities are, what they expect from a restaurant, what forms of irritation they have, what food they prefer, and so on. The good server panders to all of this. Like St. Paul, They are all things to all people but not from the same motives. They are intelligent enough to adapt themselves to other people's requirements. They put themselves out for the sake of others. They are tactful, observant, efface themselves, and so on. However, they do all of this because they are playing a role. And they are quite right, because they are intelligent. But in the work the case is different. External considering from a life point of view is not the same as external considering from a work point of view. At the same time, a person who knows what external considering means in life, and who is trained in studying the requirements of other people, may perhaps learn better what external considering means in this work. What we need to realize is that the kind of external considering done by the server is not the same as that which becomes eventually necessary for everyone in this work. We come to the necessity and to the meaning of external considering in the work from a different side, which is certainly connected with ourselves and with our self-interest, but not in the same way. Our objective is to try to awaken, not to be so identified with everything, not to be slaves to useless negative states, to blank minds, and so on. If we continually make accounts against one another by privately despising, by wrongful talking, by psychologically murdering others and so on, all work on oneself is negated. In the process of awakening from sleep, one thing hangs on another thing. One leg cannot get out of bed. The whole of our body must get out of the bed, if we want to stand upright. After a time in the work, we come to that point of sincerity in which we realize that we simply cannot allow ourselves to be in some particular state that we observe we are in. It is then that we begin to see why it is that we must externally consider, that we must get things right in ourselves with regard to other people. So we will see from this, that external considering in the work is not something superficial, but something very deep. At first we must practice external considering quite externally, so to speak, but notice the quality of it. The more sincere it is, the better the quality. The more superficial and pretentious, the more contrived it becomes, the worse the quality. All efforts in the work, as pointed out, depend for the outcome on their quality. Try as a practical exercise to externally consider a particular person that irritates you for a period of 1 week. Observe your mechanical reactions to this person. Observe your mechanical criticisms. Observe where you feel superior. Try to find in yourself the same things that you complain of in the other person. Think about how you would like the other person to think of you, as you think of him or her. Put yourself in the other person's place. Try to see where the trouble lies in yourself, as well as in the other person. Try not to identify and take things personally. Notice your inner talking, and what it is up to. Awaken to the realization of what you are doing, which will then be your aim for a week. Remember it every day on getting up. Think of it at night, where you might have failed, why you failed, where you began to internally consider instead of to externally consider. Then you will understand the meaning of external considering, and how it can change our state of being.